Hello everyone. Today I'm once more going to be featuring the Ägir. And it is which has been changed a fair bit. Before I start though, I do want to highlight something that has been bothering me a fair bit after, well, a fair bit of my viewers kind of pieced this thing together and gave me some information. And now when I look at it, I can't help but feel pretty damn annoyed. First of all, the Ägir is, of course, an O-class super heavy cruiser. In fact, if we look at the description, it says one of the variants for the project of a high-speed super heavy O-class cruiser, blah blah blah, with excellent protection. If you have the Tech Tree expanded mod, you can also see the Siegfried. The Siegfried is, of course, also a super heavy type O cruiser, aka an O-class cruiser. These both are of the same class. Now they have different variants, much like, for example, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. The Germans often used the same hull, and then they had different superstructures. Scharnhorst with the 9 guns and Gneisenau with the 6 heavier guns, the same way the Siegfried uses the 6 380mm guns, and the Ägir uses, of course, the 9 305mm guns. So Wargaming has recreated the O-class. This is, of course, where it gets a bit silly. Now, Wargaming often states, in fact, they often go out of their way to state how accurately they recreate blueprints. In fact, if you look at any of their dry dock vids, I can play a clip here in the background.
We recreate ships accurately, according to their historical blueprints, and send them into battle.
Indeed. They often talk about this, how they use the accurate blueprints to recreate them, and in fact they often use this to justify certain armor schemes or designs and decisions and so forth, because they want to be historically accurate, as the blueprint themselves say. And this is where I have a bit of an issue. The issue is that if we go to Wargaming's own Wikipedia, they have their own wargaming.net wiki, where they feature all these different ships that they are planning to add or have already added to the game. And it's actually quite extensive. It's in Russian, it's their own site, and this of course has the Schlachtkreuzer Type 0, aka the Type 0 cruiser, the super heavy cruiser that we were just talking about. Meaning we have, for example, the Deutschland class here, and of course the O cruisers were supposed to be the logical continuation of these. Now, the reason for my annoyance, of course, is that if we open these blueprints and we actually look at them, well, this is where things start to get rather interesting. First of all, the turtleback is actually sloped differently on the blueprints than it is in game. In fact, in the blueprints there's a much shallower slope to the turtleback, which means that shells hitting would actually not citadel you quite as easily as they do in game right now. But that's something that you can maybe put up to a small design flaw or a small issue. But the bigger issue is, of course, this part here. You see where the citadel plating ends, right underneath the front turrets? There is actually an extended forward plate of what appears to be 60mm plating. Now, this, of course, is hugely useful. I mean, when we consider the 27mm nose of the Ägir, having this increased plating protecting the citadel would be hugely advantageous, and according to the blueprints this was intended for the Type O super heavy cruisers. However, if we go and look back in the game itself, we will quickly notice that no such armor plate exists here. In fact, if we look at the Hindenburg, we can see that the Hindenburg, it does have its plate, just like it's supposed to. This is the kind of plate we're basically looking for. This is the kind of plate that should be there. But on the Ägir, this is entirely missing. Now, perhaps you could make the argument that because this is some sort of variant of the O-class cruiser, it's okay that it doesn't have it. But the Siegfried has exactly the same hull, and that forward protective plate is entirely missing there as well. So they are, of course, identical hulls, copy paste, it's the Type O hull, but for some reason that ever important plating that would be so incredibly useful on the Ägir because it has this fantastically huge nose, and especially would help protect the Citadel when you angle nose in and push nose in, which is basically what you have to do because it's supposed to be a brawling cruiser. Well, that plate is entirely missing. And as I mentioned, the turtleback angle is of course so steep as well that it doesn't really work. You just eat full citadels. So at this point I do have to question the design decisions. Was like, why was this so overlooked? Where is the working turtleback? Where is the front armor plate? Where are the things that are supposed to be on these Type O super heavy cruisers and have mysteriously gone missing? I don't have the answer for that. Maybe someone in chat will know better, or perhaps Wargaming will enlighten us to why this armor is missing, whereas many other recent ships have gotten some very, very extensive nose armor platings that just happen to completely protect the Citadel. I am curious, I would like to know myself. Anyway, that was my pet peeve that I felt like I needed to bring up. Let's move on to my Ägir commentary itself. So, moving on to the admittedly gorgeous looking ship itself, the Ägir. Tier 9, German, super heavy cruiser. Super heavy can of course be somewhat debated. I went over many of the points of the ship itself earlier, what makes it tick, what makes it good. The guns are basically 305mm guns, and because of German anemic HE, you'd generally want to be using AP. However, your dispersion is quite over the place and you don't have any improved angles on them, like for example the Alaska. The AP performance, or in terms of penetration, the AP is very similar to Alaska, so the same 305mm guns. Well, not exactly the same, but very, very similar. No improved pen angles though, and of course you lack Alaska's incredible dispersion, as well as Alaska's great gun angles, which allows it to use all guns easier. So in general the guns are pretty trash. To put it simply, the guns on this ship are very, very questionable. As I mentioned earlier, the turtleback is not reliable at all, and the 90mm plating on the upper belt is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing when you're able to angle it and against light HE, but it's a curse if someone gets your broadside, because that 90mm plating is just so damn unnecessarily thick that it ends up arming basically all AP shot at you. So you're either eating citadels or you're eating full pens. That was, by the way, did you guys see the desync on that volley? That's something that's been happening a lot with this recent patch. If you go back and look at that in slow motion, you'll see that the 3 shells that actually hit him were the 3 perfectly clustered shells that were in front of his ship. But because of the desync, they weren't actually landing in front of him like it looked like on our screen, but they actually hit him. That's the desync that's been an issue lately, and we've been seeing quite a bit of it. Moving on, the torpedo angles are pretty good, but actually getting to use the torpedoes in this thing is a challenge. The one thing the ship had was secondaries. That was basically the one gimmick. And of course, that anyone who has played a secondary ship knows how hard it generally is to make use of those secondaries. Some ships are better than others. Either Georgia can close the distance so quickly that you can get some secondary power out of it before it melts, or alternatively something like a Kurfürst is just so stupidly tanky, or Ohio is just so stupidly tanky that it's hard to stop that thing getting into secondary range. Massachusetts kind of operates along those lines as well. The ship is so tanky that you'll get into secondary range and actually be able to do something before you're melted. However, even with all of these super tanky BBs, they have very, very strong main guns to support them, and in fact trying to get a lot of value out of the secondaries is very, very difficult, and most people know that it's incredibly situational. It's not every game. It's far from every game. It may be 1 in 10 games. The rest of the time, your main guns are doing the heavy lifting, and your secondaries are more of a decorative role. That's just the way it goes. It's hard to get into a position where your secondaries can farm targets long enough to actually start fires and do significant damage before they get into cover or something similar, or before you're basically focus fired and melted because you're so damn overextended or just torped or whatever. So secondaries as a weapon type are poor. That's really what it comes down to. They're fun, don't get me wrong. I love secondary ships. I think secondary ships are hilarious. That's why I really enjoyed the Ägir. But they are extremely situational, very difficult to get into a position to actually use them, and usually pretty damn easy to counter. You see a secondary ship push in, you disengage, you kite, you farm it. There's not a whole lot he can do because usually you give up a lot of captain and module upgrades just to make those secondaries do what they're doing. So Ägir's secondary power was its one great gimmick, but even then you needed a lot of things to go right, namely Gunther Lutyens is basically mandatory. Without Gunther Lutyens you don't reach those DPM numbers that you actually want, because you want his 15% buff, and of course it had good base values. However, the day after I posted my video about me actually enjoying this ship, Wargaming nerfed the secondary reload from 3.1 to 3.6 seconds. What is that? Almost a 20% nerf? Not quite that much. But obviously a significant DPM nerf. And on most ships, losing a bit of secondary power isn't really that big of a deal. You can take away a bit of Massachusetts secondary power, and it's still got these great 406mm guns, it's still got fast heal, it's still got this tanky ship, good firing angles, like it's still a meaty BB that can still do a lot of things. It's not a big deal. Ägir, without the secondaries, doesn't really do too much. The main guns are sadly very underwhelming. The hull itself isn't particularly tanky or stealthy, and it's incredibly clumsy, especially when you compare it to any of the other super cruisers. In fact, an Alaska ship that I considered quite overpowered, it's better than the ship in almost every situation. Even in a straight up fight, within secondary range, I'm not entirely certain Ägir would always win. If you can maintain perfect angling against the Alaska all the time, then sure, then you'll win with the secondaries. But Alaska gets one single good volley in on you and he can basically blap you. So that fight was already very skewed to begin with. The reason why this nerf hurts so much, well, here's another example by the way of these secondaries being incredibly situational. The addition of Soviet battleships and of course now Soviet cruisers. The pen on these secondaries is only 32mm, so something like a Sovietsky Soyuz, which has far more, or the Vladivostok that I'm also going to be engaging, that also has far more. These guys are basically immune to your secondary power. You don't do anything with your secondaries. You do a ton of hits that do no damage, and you're basically just begging to get a fire started. So secondaries are situational, gimmicky, short range, not good at hitting actively evading DDs, not good against any sort of heavily armored ship. They are very gimmicky. So, but another reason why this nerf hurts so much is now it takes you longer to proc Gunther Lutyens. And he was one of the reasons why this build could work to begin with. You pushed in somewhere, you got your, 140 hits or something to proc Gunther Lutyens, and then you got that 15% boost, and then you were like kind of activated. Then you really had your secondaries going. You got to full power. But with the nerf to the reload, it makes it it takes so much longer now to proc Gunther, which overall ends up being an even bigger nerf in terms of effectiveness. So I haven't had a single game even close to as good as the ones I had earlier. I've been playing the Ägir ever since they gave us these test chips, maybe like 3 days I've been playing it, and I haven't had a single game anywhere near as good as basically any of the random Ägir games I had earlier. The nerf might seem small, but it is extremely oppressive for the ship. The Ägir is no longer fun. It needed that stupidly strong... Oh, there we go. Now we procced. Sorry, it was 100 secondary hits, not 140. So now we basically got the full power, but of course if you're fighting a ship like, for example, a Vladivostok, your secondaries don't really do much. I have, if I hit the upper belt or the deck armor with these secondaries, I'm not doing any damage. So, and of course Citadel is also going to shatter them. So, a very, very gimmicky power, and I cannot understand for the life of me why they felt like this power was too powerful. Like, why did they think the secondary was too strong? Of all the ships to counter, an Ägir crawling up on you is probably one of the easiest ships out there. It is so very situational. It's huge, it's clumsy. It can be overmatched through the nose. Like both the Sovietsky Soyuz and the Vladivostok could easily overmatch me through the massive 27mm nose. Of course, that 60mm plating that should ideally be there would help a lot, but obviously that's not a thing. So, oh, and it burns. And in this recent patch, I've also seen turrets break a lot. In fact, I'm using that. I don't think turrets were quite this easy to break, not even on the Shanbard, but I'm consistently breaking the front guns on this Shanbard. And this is something I've also seen in this recent patch. Turrets seem to break all the time. I don't think it's just me, because it's been on a completely unprecedented level, the amount of turrets I've just been shredding left, right and center. In fact, I feel like every time I aim at turrets, I break them. I played the Shikishima and I permanently destroyed the front guns on a booster with one volley. Donskoy pops up. Pretty much full broadside. Most of my shells go into water. That German fantastic dispersion. The Alaska at that range would have devastated the Donskoy. I did one pen and one pen. The main guns are very poor. My turret breaks. I go for a set of torps on him. I of course have my secondary set on him to shred him, and I try to weave between these torpedoes as well as I can. We're probably gonna hit one at least. We do hit one, but we also land a torpedo, and he actually gets... Oh no, I do get the kill, but the Öland kills themselves trying to torp me, but because I reversed out of the way, the torps ended up hitting him instead. This has been, I guess you could call, one of those really few games where I've been able to live long enough to actually keep my secondaries on the target for a very long time. And this is because I've been playing an insanely vulnerable position. I've gone right into the middle of the map. Like, when you do this, I would say the majority of the time you're just gonna get killed instantly. Crossfire, some DD YOLOs you, some BB just gets a good volley in, like, something just kills you off. Normally you die very quickly in this situation, but I've gotten very lucky and I managed to farm for a really long time. And the torpedoes, he ends up dodging them. There's a nice gap developing as well, so no torpedo hits. We do end up winning this game, and the game ends in a victory. 143k damage. That's probably one of the better games I've had in the Ägir. I can probably, if I keep playing, I can probably get a better game out of it. But really, I don't find this ship fun anymore. The overwhelming secondary power was what made it fun. Because then you had that one thing going for you. You don't have speed, you don't have concealment, you don't have AA, you don't have maneuverability, you don't have gun power, you don't really have a lot of things in this thing going for you. But you had one thing, and it was secondaries, and wargaming, you ruined it. This ship is no longer in any way recommended. This ship isn't even fun. Looking at the team score, I mean, 1.5k. I didn't even top the scoreboard because ultimately I did a lot of chip damage to a lot of BBs. And that's what you mostly do with secondaries. But when you end up facing battleships that don't suit you, which can happen here, for example, you end up against Vladivostok and Sovietsky Soyuz. When we look at the detailed report, you can see that 316 secondaries hits and only 63k damage. My main guns only did 39k, so obviously they still did the vast majority of the damage, but the fires, of those fires over 20k was on the Shanbard. The Sovietsky Soyuz and the Vladivostok, both of them took mostly gun damage. Even though my gun damage was pitiful, it still did more than my secondaries. In fact, the only reason my secondary damage is so high is because basically all that 53k on the Shanbard is from them. They were useless against almost all other targets. Ägir is not a ship I can recommend anymore. It's kind of like the Odin. They killed the one thing that made it fun. In Odin, brawling was what made it fun. They took the health down to 52k. You can't push in a brawl because you die so easily, so the ship is no longer fun. In Ägir, the secondaries was the one thing that made it fun, but it's no longer rewarding when you push into these insanely difficult, risky positions just to get into secondary range, and then you realize that the damage you put out is lesser than what they can shoot right back at you. In fact, you find yourself losing trades because your secondaries no longer do enough damage. It's underwhelming, it's depressing, and sadly, when it comes to the Ägir, the fun has also been cancelled. As always, thank you guys for watching, thank you for following. If you feel like subscribing, I do really appreciate it, as I am trying to grind that 100k subs. Either way, I do appreciate the viewership, and I'll talk to you guys next time.